Good morning. My name is Tiffany Couch, and I am the owner of Acuity Forensics, a forensic accounting firm down in Vancouver, Washington. I'm really sorry I couldn't be with you today. Other work has precluded me from coming up to Federal Way and sharing in your meeting, but I'm very happy to have the opportunity to participate. Frank and Scott and others at the Archdiocese have asked me to talk to you a little bit about internal controls, the risk of fraud, and really how to avoid having to meet me in person. In all seriousness, some of you have already met me through the regular PFOR process, and others of you have met me through other unfortunate situations like my having to investigate allegations of theft. Specifically theft from the bad acts or the misdeeds of volunteers to employees to even priests. And so I really want to talk to you today about how that happens, why that happens, and how to avoid having it happen to you. So let's talk a little bit about occupational fraud and what that means, and why somebody might even think about perpetrating such a crime. So occupational fraud is when somebody who has a trusted position or an employment position uses that position to benefit themselves. Typically, and for the most part, when we're talking today, we're going to be talking about the theft of cash, whether that's incoming cash that we steal before we make it to the bank, or money that's already in the bank that we disperse out of the bank for our own benefit. When we talk about fraud and why somebody does that, you might be surprised to find out that in all of the years that I've been doing this and investigating these crimes, there hasn't been one fraudster, not one, who was not the most well-liked and most trusted person who worked for my client. And that's really often the worst part of my job, because I can figure out the money part, I can figure out what happened, how it was hidden, but I can't fix the part where the owners or management trusted the person who was perpetrating the crime against them. And let me tell you, you might have told your children, don't get in a car with a stranger. They might be nice. They might look like mom and dad. They might say, here's some candy. Your mom and dad are hurt. Let me take you to them. It's really the same thing. Fraudsters use their ability to be liked and to be trusted to perpetrate their crimes. And so if there's one thing that you walk away with today, it is this: internal controls are a must. Trust is not an internal control. Just because we trust somebody or we like them does not mean that we should give them the keys to our kingdom and allow them to have all access with no oversight over our money. Typically, when fraud happens, three things have to occur, and we call that the fraud triangle, right? The first thing that has to happen is that a person has to have an internal need. And that internal need can be anything from, I don't have enough money to pay my mortgage, to I really just need the brakes on the car fixed, to I have a gambling problem, an addiction problem, I need the money to take care of a sick child, to take care of a sick parent. Those internal needs are not something we always know is going on in our co-workers' lives. The second thing that has to happen for fraud to occur is a rationalization. Something like, well, if I just take the money right now to pay the mortgage or to pay for the brakes on my car, I'll pay it back later. I don't make enough money being a bookkeeper at this church, and I'm really worth more money. And so if I'm just going to take what I'm really worth because they don't pay me enough. Another rationalization might be, I'll just pay it back next time I get paid. Whatever that looks like, we don't always know what the person's pressure or rationalization is. The only thing we can do, that third piece of the triangle, is limit their opportunity, because the third thing that has to happen for fraud to occur is that the person has to have the ability to take the money. And it is our jobs, whether we're the PAA or the bookkeeper or the priest, to limit an individual's opportunity to take the money. Because let's all face it, somebody's pressure could change in an instant. You might get bad news about a sick child or a sick parent. You might find out that your spouse has been laid off. You might get an unexpected bill in the mail. None of us ever knows what sort of pressures a person is dealing with, and we never know when those pressures change or become too unbearable that they find other ways to fix those problems. So, keeping in mind the fraud triangle and keeping in mind how we limit opportunity, that's really what I want to talk to you about, is some of the opportunities that I've seen come through and have allowed people specifically in some of the churches at the Archdiocese, some of the people in the churches, to take money. So, let's first talk about money coming in and how we protect the money coming in before it makes it to the bank. Most of you, and I would say almost all of you now, it's changed over the years, but the longer I do the PFORs or go in and look at internal controls, the better you guys are all getting at the Sunday collection counts or the weekend mass collection counts. We always want to make sure that the ushers or the folks inside of the mass who are collecting the money are not related. And we want to make sure that at the end of mass that they are taking the money that is in the bags or in the collection plate and are placing that money in a tamper-evident bag. Okay? We want to number those bags. We want to put that money in a safe in the sacristy, literally during the Mass or right after Mass. And we want to make sure that the folks in the back who are taking the money out of the collection plates or the collection bags are doing that with at least 2 people, meaning we want dual custody at all times over that money. We then want somebody like the priest or maybe even the PAA, somebody who's not counting the money on Monday, to go to the sacristy, take the funds out of the safe, and walk them over to the folks who are going to count the money. We want to make sure that the people counting the money are rotating, and we want to make sure they are not related. One of the biggest mistakes I see being made is that we're not counting the money, one of the biggest mistakes I see being made is that when we're filling out the count sheets that we're not filling those out in pen. We want to make sure that the counters are filling that out with pen so that even if they're making a mistake, they can cross out their mistake, put in the right amount, and all of them sign those sheets of paper. Speaking of which, we want everybody signing the piece of paper. I don't want to see count sheets that are in pencil. I don't want to see count sheets that are nice and neat on in an Excel spreadsheet, because that just allows the person who's taking the money to the bank to change the count, and we don't want that to happen. Speaking of taking the money to the bank, we want to make sure that the count sheets are directed to the bookkeeper or the person who is recording the money into your accounting system, and that the person who's recording the money into the accounting system is not also the person who's taking the money to the bank. We want to segregate or separate those two things. Also, in terms of money coming in, and I've literally watched 2 people be let go as a result of this next scheme, is other money that comes in. And I see this most especially in schools, but sometimes when it's a parish only, where we're collecting money like fundraising money, lunch money, oh my gosh, a school collects so much money. Sometimes it's just kind of scary, but we don't always receipt the money in. No matter what, no matter whether the person wants a receipt or not, please make it a policy that for all funds coming in, we write a receipt. Even if it's we print something out of QuickBooks, we go and get one of those cheap Walmart receipt books and we mark down whether we received money in cash, in check, or even in credit card. Please use the receipt system diligently and make sure those receipts are forwarded to the person who is going to enter the income into the books, so that when that person also gets the bank statement, we can match that the money that came in per the receipts matches the money that came into the bank. I hope that makes sense. Another most common kind of scheme that I see, which is also the easiest to catch, is the fact that people are writing checks to themselves, they're writing checks to their personal vendors, and they're also writing, they're also misusing debit and credit cards. So let's start with checks. For the most part, the best internal control is that we have an invoice, the bookkeeper or whoever's doing your bookkeeping enters an approved invoice into the system, and then that invoice and canceled check is presented to the priest, who signs the check. Sometimes I know some of you PAAs are signing the checks, but every check that's being written should be backed up by a legitimate invoice. But that doesn't stop there. One of the most common failures I see in internal controls is the lack of review of the bank statements and canceled checks. So number one, when you go back to your parish, make sure that your canceled checks are accompanied with your bank statement every single month in paper. Okay? Pay the extra money, $10 a month, to make sure you're getting your canceled check images returned. And then, if you're the one signing the check, then direct those bank statements and canceled checks to somebody like the priest or a member of the finance council, somebody who can review the bank statements and canceled checks to ensure that all funds that are leaving the bank accounts are only for parish business. And that means also looking at the bank statements. Is somebody using a debit card inappropriately? I recently identified thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of dollars from somebody who worked at the church and was paying for all of their personal meals, paying for personal shopping and personal trips using the debit card. So we really need to make sure that there is an accurate oversight over the bank statement, and then also those canceled checks. Are all the checks that are clearing the bank for parish purposes, and we want to make sure they're not for anybody other than parish business. Payroll. We also want to make sure that if people are on salary, that their salary matches what's been approved by the priest. And we also want to make sure if they're hourly, that their hours are approved by somebody other than themselves. We want to make sure folks are being paid for the hours they work. We also want to make sure that their pay rate is accurate for what has been approved. So sometimes I see people manipulate their hours, and then sometimes I've seen even the rate of pay manipulated, or both. Also, deductions. Now I know you guys are all now using the Archdiocesan system, so this is not very typical. Sometimes I've seen where people don't have the appropriate deductions taken out of their check, like Social Security or federal withholding, but I believe you've got a pretty good system now that you've got your outside payroll service. So I won't get into that too much, but please just be mindful that your rates of pay and hours should match what's on file with or in that person's employment file. Expense reimbursements. So if somebody is traveling, like all of you are in Federal Way today, we want to make sure that when they come back and present us with an expense reimbursement, that they have appropriate receipts, that it's approved, and that everything is matching before we actually make a payment. We always also want to make sure that our internal control is for the checks, for the receipts to match what's being paid. We don't ever want to accept a credit card statement, for example. We want the actual receipts. That just eliminates the opportunity for somebody to turn in a receipt one month and just then turn in their credit card statement the next. Lastly, I really want to talk about scrip. We want to make sure that if we have a scrip program, that first and foremost, that I believe it's 75% of the time that it takes to run the scrip program is being done by volunteers. We want to make sure that the scrip inventory is kept at the school and not at somebody's house. And then we want to make sure that we are running a correct inventory, that we have a beginning balance, and that all of the sales of scrip are backed up by the money that we deposit into the bank, and that the ending inventory then matches, and that we don't have any discrepancies. So that's another big one. You know, in the recent past, I'll tell you about some of the schemes that I've seen. I've recently seen a situation, again, with the debit and credit cards, most common, where somebody's using the debit or credit cards for personal expenses. Or we look at things like Costco receipts and somebody's buying their Easter dinner supplies in addition to the toilet paper and all of the other stuff that they're buying for the church. So please take a really close look at those receipts. As I think about some of the other schemes I've seen where we're not using the tamper-evident bags, or the tamper-evident bags get to the counters and they've been opened or torn open and it's been described as an accident or what have you. Those tamper-evident bags should never be opened and by anybody other than the counters. And I've also recently seen a scheme where we take up special collections and the money was not directed back to the office, and in fact the priest was the person collecting the money. So we want to make sure that we keep the priest safe in his job and make sure that any collection, whether it's a regular mass, a baptism, or any other sacramental type of giving, functions in the same way as mass, right? Where we take the money, we have ushers place the money in a bag, the bag is in a safe, and then that money is directed to the counters at the beginning of the week. Many years ago, I investigated a situation where a volunteer at one of your churches was in charge of a fundraising event and was taking the money. She was actually taking the money to the bank, depositing the money to the bank, and then withdrawing cash at the same time that she was depositing the money. And so nobody was looking at the bank statements or canceled checks, and had they looked, they would see, oh, we have a deposit and we have a withdrawal all on the same day, literally right around the same time. So that review of bank statements and canceled checks, I can't stress that enough. Let me think. Scrip is a big one. Scrip is really easy to take, and I can't tell you how important it is to have records, inventory records, to prove that the scrip came in, that it was sold, and that we have a discrepancy in the actual inventory. So I'm coming up on my 20-minute limit here. I have so much to tell you in such a short period of time, but if I could just summarize it, is this. We want to make sure that we have proper internal controls over the money coming in and the money that's already in the bank. It doesn't have to be complicated to have proper oversight to make sure that the person counting the money isn't also posting the money to the bank accounts. We can make sure that the person who's writing the checks is not also signing the checks. We can get anybody, a parishioner, a finance council person, even a priest, to look at the bank statements and cancel checks to make sure that those disbursements are appropriate and only for parish business. And really, it keeps us all safe in our jobs. And lastly, if there's one thing that you walk away from, is this. Please remember that trust is not an internal control. We can love each other, we can trust each other in our employment situations, but we want to trust but verify. Again, keeping your assets safe and keeping everybody safe in their jobs. I just want to thank you for your time. I will be available on my cell phone right now at 360-601-4151 if you have any questions that I can help you with. And you can always reach me. I'll just give you my website, acuityforensics.com, A-C-U-I-T-Y forensics.com. Don't hesitate to call me, call Scott, call Frank if you have any questions, because we're always here to be helpful to you, to make sure that you don't have internal controls that are too burdensome for your organization, but we're also all keeping you safe. Thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful day.